Welcome to Affair Crimes Uncovered. Enjoy this true crime story.
The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, set in Springfield, Missouri, is a true crime tale that has captivated millions. It's a haunting story of love, deception, manipulation, and desperation. Gypsy's story is shocking, not just because of the crime she committed, but because of the decades of suffering and manipulation that led up to it. The events that transpired might sound like the stuff of nightmares, but for Gypsy, it was her life. Let's dive into this complex and tragic tale, one that raises Gypsy Blanchard and her daughter had moved to Springfield in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina destroyed their home in Louisiana. With nowhere to go, Gypsy claimed they had lost everything, and people quickly came to their aid. Habitat for Humanity even built them the small house on W Volunteer Way, fully equipped with wheelchair ramps and other necessities to accommodate Gypsy's many medical needs. According to DD, Gypsy suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and a host of other debilitating conditions. DD kept Gypsy's head shaved and dressed her in bright childlike outfits. Gypsy was often seen with a feeding tube and oxygen tank, and her high-pitched voice and childlike demeanor made her seem even younger than her years. Despite her many hardships, Gypsy remained cheerful, attending local charity events with her mother and always displaying a heartwarming optimism. DD was her caregiver, her advocate, and her best friend. Together, they were a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that love could conquer even the worst adversities. But behind closed doors, a different reality was unfolding, one that would eventually lead to murder. While DD painted herself as a devoted mother who had given up everything to care for her daughter, the truth was much darker. DD was suffering from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental disorder where a caregiver fakes or causes illness in someone under their care to gain attention and sympathy. From a young age, Gypsy had been subjected to a life of unnecessary medical treatments, surgeries, and medications. DD had convinced countless doctors that Gypsy suffered from a list of ailments, often switching doctors when they began to suspect that something was wrong. Gypsy was fed through a feeding tube, confined to a wheelchair, and put on medication that caused her teeth to rot and her muscles to atrophy. For years, she had been led to believe she was ill. But as Gypsy grew older, she began to question her mother's motives. She noticed that she could walk perfectly fine, yet her mother insisted she use a wheelchair in public. She also realized that she could eat solid foods, even though her mother said she needed a feeding tube. Gypsy's suspicions grew, and she began to understand that the life she had known might be based on lies. As Gypsy reached her teenage years, she yearned for freedom and independence, but DD kept her under tight control. DD monitored her daughter's every move, keeping her isolated from the outside world. Gypsy wasn't allowed to attend school, socialize with friends, or make decisions for herself. Her mother even went as far as altering Gypsy's birth date, convincing her that she was younger than she actually was. Gypsy's frustration grew, but every time she tried to resist, DD would threaten her. DD told Gypsy that she would die if she didn't follow her instructions, reminding her of all the terrible illnesses she supposedly had. DD used guilt and manipulation to maintain control over her daughter, convincing her that she couldn't survive without her mother's care. Despite the strict surveillance, Gypsy managed to find one source of escape: the internet. Late at night, when her mother was asleep, Gypsy would sneak onto her laptop and explore the world beyond her confined life. It was through this secret online activity that Gypsy began to understand just how abnormal her life was, and that perhaps she didn't have to live this way. In 2012, Gypsy joined a Christian dating website where she met a young man named Nicholas Godejohn. Nicholas was from Wisconsin, and while he had his own personal struggles, including a history of mental health issues, Gypsy found solace in his company. For the first time, someone was listening to her, caring for her, and treating her as an equal. Their relationship quickly became intense, with Gypsy confiding in Nicholas about her life and her desire for freedom. She shared the horrors of her mother's abuse and expressed her growing desperation to escape DD's grasp. Nicholas, who had become infatuated with Gypsy, was horrified by her story and vowed to help her in any way he could. Their love blossomed in secret, and soon they began discussing ways for Gypsy to finally break free. At first, they fantasized about running away together, but over time, their conversations took a darker turn. Desperate for a way out, Gypsy and Nicholas came up with a plan, one that would ultimately lead to tragedy. Gypsy and Nicholas began planning Dee Dee's murder in early 2015. Gypsy felt trapped, desperate, and utterly powerless. She believed that her mother would never let her go, and that the only way to escape was to kill her. Nicholas agreed to help, driven by his desire to protect Gypsy and fueled by his own dark fantasies. On June 10, 2015, Nicholas traveled to Springfield. Gypsy and Nicholas had planned every detail. Nicholas would kill Dee Dee, and then they would run away together. In the dead of night, while Dee Dee slept, Nicholas entered the Blanchard home. Gypsy, unable to bear witness, hid in the bathroom, covering her ears to block out the sounds. Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee multiple times, and when it was over, he and Gypsy fled the scene. They left the town of Springfield, hoping to start a new life together. But Gypsy, who had been sheltered and isolated her entire life, wasn't prepared for what would come next. In the days following the murder, Gypsy and Nicholas went to stay in a motel, relishing their newfound freedom. But Gypsy's guilt and confusion weighed heavily on her. She had spent years suffering under her mother's control, and now that it was over, she didn't know how to feel. In a strange twist, Gypsy posted a message on Dee Dee's Facebook account that read, "That beat is dead." The post sent shockwaves through their friends and family, who were horrified and confused by the abrupt and cryptic announcement. Neighbors, worried that something terrible had happened, called the police to check on Dee Dee and Gypsy. When the police arrived at the Blanchard home, they discovered Dee Dee's body and quickly launched an investigation. It didn't take long for authorities to trace Gypsy and Nicholas's whereabouts. Within days, they were both arrested, and the shocking truth began to unravel. During the investigation, police were stunned to learn the full extent of Dee Dee's abuse. Medical records, testimony from doctors, and interviews with Gypsy revealed a pattern of manipulation and control that had spanned over a decade. Dee Dee had fabricated Gypsy's illnesses, forced her to undergo unnecessary medical treatments, and isolated her from the world. The community was shocked. People who had once pitied and supported the Blanchards now grappled with a complex mix of sympathy for Gypsy and horror at what she had done. For many, Gypsy's actions were seen as a desperate attempt to escape a life of abuse, while others viewed the murder as an unforgivable act. In court, Gypsy and Nicholas faced very different sentences. Gypsy's lawyers argued that she had been a victim of prolonged abuse and that her actions were a result of desperation and psychological manipulation. Gypsy ultimately accepted a plea deal, resulting in a 10-year prison sentence for second-degree murder. Nicholas, on the other hand, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His involvement in the planning and execution of the murder, coupled with his mental health issues, led to a much harsher sentence. Gypsy's imprisonment gave her a chance to reflect on her actions, her life, and the years of abuse she endured. Despite the horror of what had happened, prison became a place of healing for Gypsy. For the first time in her life, she had freedom, a strange irony given her confinement. She could make her own choices, learn, and grow without the shadow of her mother looming over her. In interviews, Gypsy expressed regret for the crime, acknowledging the pain she had caused. She also shared her hope of rebuilding her life once she was released. Gypsy's story became a cautionary tale, raising awareness about Munchausen syndrome by proxy and the devastating impact it can have on victims. The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother Dee Dee became one of the most infamous true crime cases in recent history. It highlighted the horrors of child abuse, the complexities of mental illness, and the lengths people will go to escape suffering. Gypsy's case sparked discussions about the criminal justice system, the role of mental health in legal cases, and the need for better protections for vulnerable individuals. For many, Gypsy's story serves as a reminder of the importance of looking beyond appearances. The Blanchards seemed like the perfect family, a mother and daughter bound by love and adversity. But beneath the surface was a world of pain, deception, and manipulation. Gypsy remains behind bars, but her story continues to resonate with those who hear it. It is a tragic tale of a young girl trapped in a life of lies, a mother whose love became twisted and harmful, and a community left to grapple with the shocking truth. As Gypsy's release date approaches, many wonder what life will hold for her after prison. For Gypsy, it's an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to live the life she was denied. But the memory of her mother and the crime that set her free will forever remain a part of her story. Gypsy Rose Blanchard's life in prison was ironically her first taste of freedom. Confined within prison walls, she was finally free from her mother's control, manipulation, and cruelty. In prison, Gypsy received medical evaluations that showed she was much healthier than her mother had led her to believe. There were no signs of the chronic conditions DD had claimed she suffered from. No leukemia, muscular dystrophy, or seizures. For the first time, Gypsy began to understand who she was outside of her mother's lies. She began taking classes, reading, and participating in prison programs. For years, DD had isolated her from the world, depriving her of education, friendships, and personal autonomy. Now, Gypsy was eager to make up for lost time. She learned to write letters, keep a journal, and even started developing a sense of self-worth that had long been stripped away by her mother's emotional abuse. Gypsy also worked with prison counselors and mental health professionals who helped her process the trauma of her past. Through therapy, she began to confront her complicated feelings about her mother, the woman who had loved her yet caused so much pain. As she navigated these complex emotions, Gypsy struggled with the intense guilt and shame that haunted her for taking part in her mother's murder, despite the years of abuse she endured. Prison gave Gypsy something she had never known before: structure. Each day was predictable, with scheduled meals, classes, and routines. This structure brought her a sense of stability and peace, a stark contrast to the chaotic life she had lived under DD's control. As Gypsy's story gained media attention, the public's reaction was mixed. Some saw her as a tragic victim of her mother's abuse, a young woman who had been forced to take desperate measures to escape her suffering. Others, however, struggled to reconcile her role in the murder. Was Gypsy a victim, a criminal, or both? Documentaries, TV shows, and news reports delved into the story, interviewing family members, neighbors, and medical professionals who had encountered the Blanchards. The story of DD's manipulation and Gypsy's suffering spread across the country, sparking a wave of support for Gypsy. Many people saw her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a survivor who had endured unimaginable abuse and had been left with no other choice. One particularly influential piece of media was the 2017 HBO documentary Mommy Dead and Dearest, which examined Gypsy's life, her relationship with DD, and the complexities of her crime. This documentary opened the public's eyes to Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a relatively rare and poorly understood form of abuse. Viewers began to empathize with Gypsy, seeing her as a young woman who had been manipulated and controlled to the point where murder felt like her only escape. The public's sympathy grew, with petitions circulating calling for her early release. People from all walks of life wrote letters of support, and Gypsy's story even inspired other survivors of abuse to share their experiences. Gypsy became a symbol of resilience, a young woman who had endured years of suffering and was now working to rebuild her life against all odds. Gypsy's time in prison was transformative, but it was also filled with challenges. She grappled with conflicting emotions about her mother, feelings of love, hatred, guilt, and sadness. In therapy, she was encouraged to explore these emotions and work toward forgiveness. But forgiving DD wasn't easy. After all, her mother had stolen her childhood, robbed her of health, and subjected her to years of unnecessary pain and suffering. Over time, Gypsy came to understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing her mother's actions. It was about letting go of the power those actions had over her. She didn't want her past to define her future, and forgiveness was a step toward reclaiming her life. Gypsy began practicing meditation and mindfulness, which helped her find inner peace. She wrote letters to herself, expressing the feelings she had never been able to voice as a child. Through these letters, she released years of pent-up anger and grief. Slowly, she started to forgive her mother, not because DD deserved it, but because Gypsy deserved to be free from the burden of hate and anger. Forgiveness became a turning point for Gypsy. It allowed her to move forward, unburdened by the shadows of her past. She began to imagine a future for herself, one that was free from fear, pain, and control. For the first time, Gypsy allowed herself to dream of a life beyond the prison walls, a life filled with the simple joys she had always longed for: friendships, love, and freedom. As Gypsy's release date approached, she began to prepare for the challenges that awaited her in the outside world. She would need to learn how to live independently, find a job, and build relationships. Things that most people took for granted, but that Gypsy had never experienced. She was determined to make the most of her second chance, but the thought of starting over was daunting. Gypsy began working with social workers and re-entry programs that help inmates transition back into society. She set personal goals for herself, focusing on education, self-sufficiency, and personal growth. Gypsy knew that rebuilding her life wouldn't be easy, but she was committed to putting in the effort. During her time in prison, Gypsy had developed a passion for helping others who had experienced abuse. She dreamed of becoming an advocate, using her story to raise awareness about Munchausen syndrome by proxy and the impact of emotional and psychological abuse. Gypsy believed that by sharing her experiences, she could help prevent others from enduring the same pain she had faced. Friends, family members, and supporters offered their encouragement, promising to stand by her as she started her new life. With their help, Gypsy hoped to create a stable, fulfilling future, one that was entirely her own. The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Dee is more than just a tale of abuse and crime. It's a story that raises important questions about family, trust, and the impact of trauma. Dee's manipulation of her daughter and her fabrication of illnesses shocked the nation, bringing attention to a rare and terrifying form of abuse. For many people, Gypsy's story is a stark reminder of the hidden suffering that can exist behind closed doors. The legacy of this case is complex. On one hand, it highlights the devastating effects of Munchausen syndrome by proxy and the failures of the medical and social systems that failed to protect Gypsy. On the other hand, it brings up difficult questions about justice and accountability. Gypsy's story isn't a simple one. It's filled with pain, betrayal, and moral ambiguity. In the years since the crime, mental health professionals, law enforcement agencies, and child protection organizations have studied Gypsy's case as an example of the complexities involved in cases of long-term abuse. It has led to increased awareness and training around Munchausen syndrome by proxy, helping professionals recognize the signs of abuse and protect vulnerable individuals. For Gypsy, however, the legacy of her story is personal. She carries the scars of her past, but she is determined not to let them define her future. She is ready to create a life for herself, one that is built on truth, freedom, and self-empowerment. As Gypsy prepares to re-enter society, her story serves as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Despite years of abuse, manipulation, and trauma, Gypsy has found the strength to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. Her journey is a testament to the power of hope, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. Gypsy's story also sheds light on the importance of awareness and intervention. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a rare but devastating form of abuse, and Gypsy's case has inspired families, teachers, doctors, and social workers to stay vigilant and trust their instincts when something feels wrong. For the community in Springfield, the Blanchard case is a haunting reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The small pink house on W Volunteer Way was once a symbol of hope and resilience, but it became the scene of a tragic crime that exposed the horrors hidden beneath its walls. Today, it stands as a somber memory of the Blanchards' twisted story, a reminder that even the most picturesque families can harbor dark secrets. As Gypsy Rose Blanchard steps out of prison, she carries with her a lifetime of experiences that no one should ever endure. But she also carries a sense of hope and purpose. Her story has touched the hearts of millions, and she hopes to use her second chance to create a positive impact. Gypsy dreams of becoming an advocate for speaking out for those who have suffered in silence and helping others understand the devastating impact of abuse. Gypsy knows that rebuilding her life will take time, patience, and hard work. She will face challenges, both from within and from the outside world, as she tries to move beyond the shadows of her past. But Gypsy is ready to embrace this new chapter, to live for herself and to create a life that reflects her true self, a life free from lies, control, and fear. For those who have followed her story, Gypsy's journey is a powerful reminder of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. She has emerged from the darkness of her past with a determination to live a life filled with purpose, kindness, and compassion. In the end, Gypsy Rose Blanchard's story is not just one of survival, it is a story of rebirth.